purpose of this panel is to help brands find a solid ground to stand on during these dramatic times and then build off of. We call this the brand therapy.
COVID-19 is actually accelerating some long-term trends.
And if you have provided outsized value as a brand, that will be remembered.
To try to maintain a real-time sense of consumer behaviors, needs, and emotions, and then become more agile in the way they respond to those shifts.
So user-generated content has been present for a long time, but now a lot of brands are really pushing it forward.
There's a lot of things that are shifting, that are really kind of switching out and accelerating a lot of things that we've been talking about.
Our approach hasn't changed, but what I find very interesting is that I think you're hearing a lot of this in Silicon Valley, and maybe this is just pure optimism, but basically what's happening today with COVID-19 is actually accelerating some long-term trends, whether it is Amazon eating the world with retail and cloud computing,
yep,
or theaters closing because Netflix and everything is going on streaming, or any of the distributed nature of the organizations. That all has been going on, and albeit probably slowly, over the last 10 to 15, 20 years. And what this has done is a step change input to actually accelerate things from our perspective. So from a COVID-19 standpoint, I think it would be a mistake to actually position or focus too much on COVID-19 itself, because in about 12 to 18 months, there hopefully will be a vaccine. And so I'm not saying things will go back to normal, but what will happen is that things are going to be, something that probably could have not happened until 2025 is happening in 2020 because of this. So I think it's figuring out how best to jump on these medium to long-term trends that have turned into short to medium-term trends from my perspective.
I know that my partner and we're not changing our approach to how we establish brand position and how we teach companies to apply it. And I agree that I think it has accelerated some behaviors. I think some behaviors are going to revert back once there's a vaccine, but there's some things that are not going to go back. And one of the things that is fascinating to me is the direct to consumer was kind of getting squeezed. Like the companies were having to sign deals with Target or Walmart or that kind of stuff, or get bought by Unilever. Suddenly, I've talked to a number of startups, direct-to-consumer startups, and they're seeing their cost per acquisition go way down because everyone's stuck at home, everyone's shopping online. So it's an interesting time. But regard to our approach to brand is what we did at Netflix. We apply it to other companies, and that is to find out what role you play, your product or service plays in people's lives. And then establish that as your brand promise. And the approach to figuring that out doesn't change, other than you can't do in-person interviews. But that's about from our perspective.
From our perspective, also, like, the approach and the process stays the same. But what we also see is that a lot of companies are trying to put more, let's say, user-generated content, which also includes like how audience is battling the situation right now. So putting that co-branded materials more out there. So user-generated content has been present for a long time, but now a lot of brands are really pushing it forward, as well as like really trying to show more about how the brand cares about this market situation and can help consumers in different ways, so through different triggers. So yeah, I think like approach is the same, but there are some elements of branding that have maybe changed a little bit from a number of brands right now.
Best practices are becoming more and more important. So building those foundations to how you actually distribute your brand and build brand equity. But the interesting piece that's changing a lot is the landscape from a consumer standpoint. Prior to all this, brands could go out and simply talk about how customer-centric they were, how sustainable they were, how much they valued work-life balance, but they didn't actually have to do anything about it, and they still got credit. I think the interesting thing coming out of this is brands that do that are going to be called out for not taking the steps and the actions to show the gratification for things like that. But then also, from a consumer standpoint, the way that people are shopping now is very different than before. I mean, you look at how people, I mean, I'm a great example, in-store pickup and curbside and restaurant takeout when I used to eat in a lot. You know, there's all these different dynamics that are changing from a digital standpoint on how consumers will separate from their limited dollars. And I think some of the brands just need to think through how the current companies that are winning, how they can adapt to some of those models a bit to really create some short-term wins when everything kind of reopens.
One of the things that I found really fascinating is on the creative end is how quickly we've had to learn to adapt the messaging and the shift around, you know, how we're selling our products or how we're communicating it and to who. I think, you know, there's some really, really beautiful examples, like a lot of the UGC content that it's really transparent, you know, where they're really just showing us ourselves in the same kind of way we're seeing each other on social media, but just finding new ways to work with that restriction underneath the original positioning of the brand or the product or the business model, and just showing how we can find and work within those restrictions, you know, to be able to tell the story of what we're selling and to who and how we're adapting. I think that's one thing that I think I've learned and been able to see, even just ourselves internally, you know, and how we communicate, even how we work remotely and how easier it is to work remotely, just like we were before. There's a lot of things that are shifting, that are, you know, really kind of switching out and accelerating a lot of things that we've been talking about before, probably to lots of clients over the past like 5-10 years. And now it's like they have no choice. You know, I think it's great in that sense. There's a certain, you know, that restriction has opened up a lot of new ideas.
Well, I want to grab on what Tony was saying, because I think it's entirely true. Actually, it's not just today that brands are being called out for quote unquote not being authentic. I think it's easier. It has been easier over the last 10, 20 years to really understand whether somebody's keeping the promise that their brand is saying, right? And so, I mean, whether that's through social media or Yelp or whatever, but you're absolutely right that people are, you know, you need to really understand what you stand for, what your differentiation is, and be true to it. Because I think one of the mistakes that at least a lot of our clients have is that they tend to look at positioning a brand as sort of a wrapper around what they do and not really connecting with it. I think, I'm sure I speak for all of you guys, maybe not, but is that you know, brand is your public articulation of your strategy, and so your strategy has to be in place. No amount of marketing or brand will fix borked strategy or tactics from an execution standpoint.
Well, one of the things that's fascinating me that I've kind of, I don't know, I guess recently had an epiphany about is the fact that building brand isn't really done by marketing. It's done by experience. It's done by customer contact. It's done by it's done by customer service. It's everything that happens with customer or potential customer. And the discussions around brand, we're all brand people. We're all marketing people, but there's no one here from product. You know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of people on the product side of things or the business side of things that are thinking of themselves as being harbingers or keepers of the brand. And that's one thing we got right at Netflix when I was there, is that the brand inspired both company and employee and feature development, and but also influenced marketing messaging at the same time.
Yep. I agree. And actually I totally am on board with that statement, because actually I am a product guy. So what I think that actually is helpful is being able to credibly engage with the product side and the engineering side and the sales side. But you're absolutely right that it's a sum of the experiences your customers and clients have with your company, and that it touches more than just marketing. So I completely agree.
Yeah, and I'm happy. I don't want to bore everyone with Netflix stories. So everything drove towards that. So on the marketing side, we created thematic supports to figure out how did we pay that off. And we talked about price, we talked about selection, we talked about ubiquity. There are all these different themes that were our wellspring for generating marketing claims that we can A/B test and do control and find a winner. But Movie Enjoyment Made Easy also guided us into going away from call to cancel to 2 clicks on the website, because that's a lot easier than call to cancel. And it turned out we got likelihood to recommend and likelihood to return rates on our exit survey shot up because of it. People couldn't believe that we were being so cool as to let them just cancel and then come back. And it turned out people needed to cancel because they were going to go away for the summer or something like that. They didn't want DVDs sitting around. And then it also influenced feature development. It influenced our ops. Our ops team kept building out hubs and mini hubs so that people were getting their DVDs within 1 business day via the post office. It influenced everything we did. Every aspect of the company was influenced by that brand promise. And that brand promise was derived from doing research with customers and non-customers to find out what role we needed to play in their lives.
Something interesting that actually, Rudy, you touched on, and Barry, I read about Netflix recently about this, is the point about who to target, like who are you branding to, who are you marketing to? Mm-hmm. And it's the companies that focused on those more tech savvy audiences are the ones who are still thriving. So your Gen Z, your millennials, because they were more tech savvy and how to be innovative in times when they're stuck at home, they're the ones leading the charge right now from a consumer stand base on purchasing in different ways, right? So I think what's going to be interesting moving forward is how some of these companies who stayed away from marketing and branding to those audiences figure out how to get in front of them and sort of play in the noise of all the other brands that are, mining for their attention. But it's a key opportunity right now. That's a field for many companies that stay away from the younger demographics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they were, not to be judgmental, but if they were doing their job properly, they would have looked at psychographics, not demographics, and not stayed away from them at all. They would look for the behavior patterns that run across all age groups.
Tony, as well, I think we see now much higher brand loyalty. So consumers, especially for retail products, aren't as inclined to trying out new things, like new actual products and goods, as they used to, a few months ago. I think it might be different for online sales when it comes to, let's say, services, but for goods and products, brand loyalty is really, really important. And I think also after the current market situation, many brands will take branding and marketing overall much more serious to build this brand loyalty, to make sure that customers are, keep on shopping with them and purchasing even during the times when they aren't inclined to trying out new things as much.
Well, that speaks on something else where, as we probably have all experienced, the first thing that gets cut in times like this is marketing investment. I think what Maryna is saying is that I think you cannot take your eye off the ball for short-term cuts when it comes to your strategy and your brand. Yep. You need to it's something. It's like a sourdough starter for a bread. You have to feed it every day, and if you pull the plug on your investment in building that experience, then it becomes a big problem. So maybe that's self-serving because we're all marketing people, but I completely believe that you need to continue to invest in your marketing, even in times like this.
Well, I would agree with that. I do think that there are certain brands that you feel like a natural fit with being out there advertising their product or service, and there are some that if they did advertise their product or service, it would feel tone deaf. But that doesn't mean you turn off marketing. It means you shift to the top of funnel.
Exactly.
Content marketing, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Don't turn off marketing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because eventually there will be a return to whatever normal is after this.
Yes.
And if you have provided outsized value as a brand, that will be remembered.
And I don't know how you guys feel about this, but based on that, the way I've seen that is because data is not as big of a part of those decisions as it should be. They're kind of making these ad hoc decisions of where to invest, how to invest, without really using the data to determine where should they actually be reinvesting those dollars, rather than just holding on to them as like a safeguard.
Yeah.
And if they invested more in data and did more with it, they could actually show them where the impact is today and then how they can shift that when things change.
Branding doesn't always mean advertising directly. So, I mean, I don't know about the US market, but for example, in Europe, Apple isn't advertising directly. So all the Apple ads are done by distributors. So all the different telecommunications companies are advertising, let's say, Apple phone or iWatch and stuff like that. So Apple doesn't actually do it directly. So they only put those Apple stores out there and make all the branding around the Apple stores, and then make sure the distributors do the marketing for them. So it's also the way you position yourself, the way like the channels you use. I don't know, like in the US maybe it's different, but in Europe that's the way they do.
It's almost the same. I think Apple, it's a fraction of what typically a company like that would spend for media. They spend just a fraction. Most of it is more customer experience, like retail, and they invest in that. And that in turn, you know,
events. I think a lot about events and really like the stores, like their own brand stores. I think that's a huge chunk of their budget, most probably spent in Europe at least.
Well, the thing with Apple is they're in the rarefied air like Nike, where they have brand recognition. So all they have to do at a top level is brand marketing, because that's essentially reminder marketing, right? So all they have to do is don't forget about us. And then all their retail partners like the AT&Ts, the Verizon say, hey, get the iPhone 10, you know, with the best network. And that they do all the sales, the direct sales stuff, but they just do as far as Apple itself, they only have to do reminder marketing at this point. And it's the same with Nike, right? Nike doesn't do a lot of direct.
And I think those are some good examples. I think the companies that position themselves well and properly, right, and have done it and have stayed true to their positioning, and they have that brand loyalty, and they really stand true to their values. People believe in their values. Those are the ones who have been able to shift a message during these days and be able to find like a new way to connect to their users really, really, really quickly, because all they do is they're just talking about their values, but just in this new paradigm that we're in, right?
Yeah,
Apple's done it, right? Like Apple recently has this, you know how they have their in their retail store, they have these classes, right, that they do. Well, they just automatically quickly shifted that to like an online thing.
Yeah.
So Nike the same way, right? With their work at home apps, they've been pushing that a lot more and just switching. It's the same exact messaging. It's the same values, the same positioning, but just like a slight different shift.
And that's the key, isn't it? That they know themselves so well that they're able to turn on a dime like that.
Yeah.
You're seeing some brands that maybe were built on affectation, not sure how to do that. And that's something that's pretty eye-opening to me.
Exactly.
The companies
Well, I think what you're finding is that the companies that were well positioned for the long-term trends are actually well positioned today. This is a wake-up call for people who are struggling with their brand or their position or their messaging or their marketing, is that they were not. I mean, again, COVID-19 is accelerating long-term trends, and so if you weren't positioned well for the long-term trends, then something was wrong with with your strategy. And I'm not just talking about brand strategy, but your company and product strategy. So I think that this in itself is a wake-up call to really step back and understand how your company is being, what the direction of your company is, as well as and then that manifests itself in your brand.
Yep.
Totally.
Yep. And even smaller brands, it doesn't even, I've seen there's been a couple cases that I've seen some smaller brands do really nice, shifting in their messaging right now during these times. One of our clients, Intermedia, is looking to do that as well. They're like a cloud service. Obviously, they're doing well in this space, but during these times. But they also have done a nice job.
I don't think my suggestions are different now than they were before. I think the one mistake that a lot of companies make that I see is treating your brand, and I think Barry touched on this earlier, which is treating your brand and your position as a marketing exercise. And it's something that it needs to be tangible and something that the company can rally around and everybody in the company can express. And I think that has always been a challenge, even in good times, to try to get people, especially here in Silicon Valley, where there are a lot of engineering and product driven people that just want to build it and they will come. And what this is such a dramatic shift in how the market works. You can't help but actually having to look at the market and try to meet their needs instead of try to build something that you think in your head is the right thing to do. So I think from a suggestion standpoint is always look at these things as a company-wide initiative or process or priority, and not think of it just as a marketing or a shift in messaging. I mean, people will call you out, as Tony said. They're going to call you out if it's not authentic, and this is where the rubber hits the road. In terms of how you react in situations like this, you have to be true to yourself and you have to understand who you are. So I think that to me is the big thing. And although I don't think that changed because of this.
Yeah, to add to that, I completely agree. So I think like if companies, say startups, we are talking about like companies who haven't done good branding, right? Especially startups right now, if they have a product out there that they haven't really marketed well, and they haven't done, let's say, huge market analysis, maybe it's the time to really go ahead and speak to their users and get some user feedback, try to understand what they're looking for, what's valuable for them, like what are their problems and how their product can meet them with their solution, or how they can adjust their product to meet to be the solution for the problem, if that is aligned with their let's say values that they have put for their product. So I think that's really something important. But also what we see as a trend right now in our team is that safety, security, like all those elements of support are becoming more and more important. I mean, they were important for a long time, but now users are really like looking for it. Okay, is it secure? Is like support? Like, is there kind of 24/7 live chat on the website that they can just kind of get instant answer for? So those elements are getting more and more important right now. So if brands are still not offering that, and if it's still not clear on their website, let's say, so this is really something to think about right now.
One of the things that I've been seeing is a lot of companies are being reactive in this time. So they're sort of sitting back, they're waiting to see what's going to happen. But there's a lot of proactive things that they can start doing to sort of plan for what the future could be. So a lot of the sort of guidance that I've been trying to give people is stop waiting. There's a lot of things that you can do at this time. You can rethink your strategy for when things go back to some sense of normal. You can come up with a brand new strategy on how you're going to be innovative and digital. But one of the real sort of keys that I've been trying to tell people is, one of the things to do right now is to try to maintain a real-time sense of consumer behaviors, needs, and emotions, and then become more agile in the way they respond to those shifts. Mm-hmm. And if they sort of follow that, then there's some really quick improvements they can make when we come out of this that are going to help sort of push the business or product or service forward instead of sort of in this wait and see what happens mode.
I mean, I think being able to, even just for us internally, I love restrictions, as a creative, like I love just being against the wall and trying to find my way out of it. And, this is I think a perfect time. And for us, there's lots of things that I do on a regular basis for our business that, that's great for the business, for biz dev and so forth. But now I can't do a lot of those things. So I've shifted to all the things that I've been wanting to do, right, over the past couple of years, and just working with that, right, and trying to see how to be as creative as we can within those restrictions and taking advantage of the situation as much as possible. And I think that's an important thing, even just for any business. It doesn't matter, what they do. Restaurants need to be doing that until Fortune 100 companies, obviously, are doing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Wasn't it Ogilvy who said something like, there's nothing as freeing as a really tight brief? Creative. I think, it forces you to understand exactly where you are in the world and forces you to get creative about how to solve the problems.
Yeah.
I totally with you.
Having worked with engineers and having worked with product as a product manager, what you need to bring to the table with them is information that they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you it's the engineers and product people like to think of themselves, even though it's not true, but they think of themselves as a meritocracy where you just do your best job and you'll ascend the ladder. So to build that credibility is to bring the information that they don't have to the table in order to help influence them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the challenge, and this is, and it's really interesting because I think this is one of the things that has been happening over the last 15 years is this whole concept of lean startup and data-driven things. It's what you're seeing is almost a complete shift away from any strategic thought and just throwing things up in the air to get data.
Yeah.
When actually you should inform how you get the data with some hypotheses. That's what brand strategy and all product strategy needs, is that sort of, you talked about constraints. Those are constraints that you need to build around the box. Otherwise, you're just boiling the ocean and you don't understand the data that you're given. And so I think that in itself, I've always talked about that brand strategy. There's an art and a science to it. So yes, data is ascendant. Data is very important, but you also need to have the strategic thinking that goes in that from a company side as well as a product side. I mean, God, I have a client that happens to be, I can't name them, but one of the largest social networks in the world, and you can guess where I am, who that is. The tendency is to just do action, right? To just get stuff done without really thinking about the strategy behind it. We were helping them with a product that they globally launched, and then they don't understand why there wasn't any traction. And it's because they launched they launched a brand new product in 5 countries and 3 continents, and then they wonder why all of these things are not working well, versus thinking about trying to start small and get lessons and scale up. They just did it, and so that's the danger of trying to just do strategy without thinking about or doing products without thinking about the strategy of the company. And what marketing and the brand can do is bring that outside influence in. And that's something that engineers and product people don't always have. So I think it comes down to information flow and getting credibility from that.
I'm going to do the whole at Netflix thing again. So apologies in advance, but at Netflix, we had our strategy set by Reed, the CEO, and it shifted over time, but let's just say early on, it was grow big on subscription DVD online and then move into streaming. It's like, okay, so you take that and you marry that with the brand promise of movie enjoyment made easy. And then you get an idea of like what you need to start testing and working on. And you have this strategy and you stick with it, but you keep testing things that may push that strategy, or it create the brand position and having the strategy in place. Totally agree. That has to be your foundation. Otherwise, you're just A/B testing. And when you A/B test, you'll get a winner. You may not get the best winner or the right winner, but you'll get a winner.
Yeah.
And so it's, for me, we were relentlessly data driven at Netflix, but we were also brand driven. So I think it's really important to have both in place and have an understanding of why they're both important for companies.
I've definitely gone through that. We're going through that right now with, I think, 2 clients, right? Where it's like, no, the product, understanding and we do branding, right? Like we lean more on we definitely do strategy, but I think our focus is more on the identity system, right? The visual side of the branding and the execution of that. Obviously the strategy is a huge part of that as well, but and the foundation of it. But it's always that kind of conversation where when we're building the product, at whatever point it's like, wait a minute, there's a lot of questions here.
It goes back to the point I made earlier, is that your brand is not a marketing effort.
Right.
And in your process, at least the way we do things, is that the best results come from when we work directly with the CEO, not the CMO, actually.
Yeah.
And it's because then you have the juice in the organization to get people involved that wouldn't normally be involved in a marketing effort.
Yeah.
So the CFO, they actually provide the most unique insights because they know where the cash is coming from and where it's going.
Yeah.
And you have to involve the head of product. You have to involve engineering, because it's as much as we like to think that the best answer is the most creative and the right one. I've always told my associates and my analysts that it's better to be right than correct. And there's a nuance there, because the right answer is not always the ivory tower correct one. It's the one that's adopted by the company. And so you may have to compromise on a handful of things, but if they're 110% behind the brand strategy because they were involved, that's okay. Yeah. It's okay. I think it's something that you have to adapt, and I've had to do that a number of times, whether companies take what I think is the right approach 100% of the time, not even close. But if it gets adopted and executed and it goes through everything, then I've done my job.
When you're working with these act now, think later companies, they tend to not build anything great because they're not mitigating a lot of risks in the beginning. So a lot of times, I've worked for a few of those companies, and one of the things that I've always brought to the table with them is the Navy SEAL motto, which is slow is smooth, smooth is fast, and fast is lethal. Mm-hmm. From a strategy perspective. And the way that I sort of try to navigate that with them is, if you take the time to plan, you can move faster later and with less risk. So the things you take to market are usually better. They get out faster so you can do more, and you don't have to take time to fix your problems and go all the way back to the beginning later on and spend those extra dollars.
Yeah, marketing planning, I think, and overall like brand strategies always comes down to around 80% of success rate for the actual brand when it comes out. So it's not much on, activation is important, of course. Without it, you don't have anything. But if you have a proper strategy and planning in place, then the rest will follow.
Where the company realizes that they're really not differentiated. Yeah. That is a wake-up call, because they're like the ones that we have the most challenging clients are the ones where their strategy isn't putting them in a good place, and they're not differentiated at all. And so it's trying to force fit a differentiation when there isn't any and is incredible doesn't work. Yeah.
It's amazing that you're mentioning it, because I have good background with finance industry. So financial services companies, they have huge trouble differentiating themselves. For example, banks, how A bank is different from B bank. You're providing pretty much the same services. Or insurance companies or trading company, investment firms, they provide the same services. And when they talk to their users, they're like, yeah, these are our services. So what else is there? So it's really hard for them to focus on branding and strategy. There are only a few companies that do that. And those are the ones that succeed. And the rest is just trying to scrape for, users that don't care much about brand loyalty. So it's very tough for some markets, like, for example, financial services, I think is a great example when it comes down to really like brand positioning is really important, especially for that industry.
There's a book I'm going to recommend for you guys if you're interested, called 7 Powers, The Foundation of Business Strategy by Hamilton Helmer. He's a Stanford professor, and Reed actually brought him in and he did a mini strategy course at Netflix. And it was a really interesting book to see, he's mapped out basically 7 powers that come from different strategies that companies have. Netflix was in the boat of the power of counter positioning, because we were counter positioned to an entire industry, not just other companies, with our model for subscription, no late fees, and that kind of stuff. But he talks about Southwest Airlines and a bunch of other stuff, and it's interesting read. So I want to recommend it.
A lot of ideas that boomed in the Web 2.0 time frame were actually ideas that people thought of during the .com days.
Absolutely.
And so, social networks, streaming, all these different things, a lot of them, the market just wasn't ready and the adoption wasn't there. And so, and it's always interesting, again, going back to Silicon Valley, a lot of companies try to build something completely new. And those are the ones that have the arrows in the back. It's not always the first company that creates the category.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd still be using Palm Trios. Well, I think it's clear because you're looking now at that. Now let's talk about strategy. You're seeing what Prime is supposed to be and Apple TV Plus is supposed to be versus being the main product or service of the company. Right. So Apple and Amazon are looking at it as part of their everything bundle, or at least I should say Amazon's looking at that. I'm not sure what Apple's doing, but
Apple's trying to win on pricing because the pricing is low. But for example, I have the Apple one, but it's like, because it's include, like I have Apple TV, so I thought like, okay, I'm just going to use it. But at the same time, I'm subscribed to Netflix, so I'm first like still looking at Netflix and then on the Apple. So Apple is trying to compete based on pricing, I think, in this category specifically.
Actually, I think Apple is just trying to build value in their ecosystem. I mean, in the end, their business model is selling hardware and increasingly services, but the services complement the main business model, which we can get into a whole other discussion about business models and legacy and all that stuff. That's for next time.
Yeah.
We've historically done a lot of consulting work, and that works well with medium-sized to large-sized companies. We're putting together boot camps that are more appropriate for smaller companies. And what it is it help. We just walk through our frameworks and help guide founders and entrepreneurs through their first positioning exercise. And since we're having to do it virtually now, we were originally going to be doing them in classroom. I'm actually beta testing how we're doing it virtually, probably through Zoom, probably through Google Docs and so forth. So if people are interested in participating in a free beta test of these boot camps, feel free to contact me.
So I don't have any specific service, but what I have been doing just to help, it's been mainly local, because where I am, there's a really big startup community in Durham, North Carolina. But I've just been open to having conversations with anybody. And it's sort of materialized into reviewing somebody's business plan or initial strategy and just providing some feedback for some opportunities on new revenue drivers that they can look into. And it's a real quick hour, just kind of riff session with people, just to kind of go through whatever is top of mind right now and provide, any insights I can, just to help out and sort of guide them forward.
We don't have any offer, or we don't have anything going on specifically, but we hop on calls almost all the time, usually about a half hour, to talk through how to think about brand, how to think about positioning, how to think about marketing messaging, channel optimization, optimization within channels as well, and just sort of like provide context and a little bit of feedback. And if they choose to go forward with us and work with us, that's great. If they don't, that's fine too. It's just sort of like a kind of rising tide lifting all boats sort of thing to help people out with their needs at this time.
At Growth Channel, we can also hop on a quick call for about 30 minutes or so to discuss branding, positioning, marketing strategy, and planning. We also have a first set free marketing ideas generation on our site, which is currently also in MVP mode. But yeah, so if anyone is interested to just kind of get some ideas for their marketing operations, so they can also like fill in a short form for that.
I mean, I would say just sort of a kind of a general, brand health check, I guess, just sort of looking at overall where they're at, how COVID has sort of, shifted or what kinds of things they've needed to do, how it's affected their business, and then be able to sort of think through just kind of a variety of things, whether it be their strategy, a little bit of maybe some their business model, or even just some ideas within their business model that they might be able to expand on, or things that they need to do, like Tony, you mentioned, for revenues, some new opportunities and so forth, or just giving them some ideas in terms of what we've seen some of our other clients seeing, some of our research, where what other companies have done have been successful in providing them some different ways they can think things through, or guiding them and feeding them some more information that might help them. Yeah. Doing a competitive analysis, maybe like, if they haven't done it, if it's a small business, doing just like a general quick competitive analysis, depending on some of the data that we get, just giving them some ideas of what some of their competitors are doing online. A lot of times, especially, some of the smaller businesses under, I don't know, 5 million or so, don't really have the bandwidth to kind of, really pay attention to some of their analytics if they don't have an in-house team. So, anybody who's looking to get a general sense of what their competitors are doing, maybe things that they're not doing online that they could be doing, just doing a quick analysis like that as well. So, all right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.